Tim Russert's second day on the witness stand ended today as the prosecution rested in the case. He is standing by to talk with us from Washington. First, some background on this day in court from NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, who's covering this case for us. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. We've seen the prosecution lay out a case that Libby made up a story about Russert as a cover-up, so that if anything Libby might have said about that CIA officer could simply be passed off as rumors and not as revealing official government secrets.
How do you feel about them trying to say you had an accident?
Tim Russert faced hours of questions.
I'm going back to work. I'm done.
An aggressive cross-examination again today by Libby's lawyer, who tried to discredit Russert. One defense tactic, using TV clips of Russert talking about his own role in this case.
I was asked about a phone call that Scooter Libby made to me.
Libby's lawyer, Ted Wells, suggested there was bad blood between Russert and Libby. No, sir, Russert said. Wells then pointed to an appearance Russert made on the morning Libby was indicted.
Santa Claus is coming tomorrow. Surprises. What's going to be under the tree?
Russert testified that he meant it would be a big news day. Prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald followed up asking Russert, "Did you take any joy in Mr. Libby's indictment?" Russert responded, "No, not at all, and I don't take joy in being here." And Brian, Monday, Libby gets to start calling his own witnesses to try to show that any conflicts in what he said about this CIA leak case were just honest mistakes and not deliberate lies like the prosecution claims. Brian?
Kelly O'Donnell starting us off from court today in Washington. Kelly, thanks. And now, as we said, for the first time since this trial got underway, we are able tonight to talk to Tim Russert, though I should point out there are still restrictions on what Tim can say, what we can ask, because he could be called back to the stand. Tim, we'll start off with how much time you testified and the essence of your testimony, your answers to the questions.
Well, Brian, over a two-day period, the direct examination by the prosecutor, the first round was about 12 minutes, the second one just a few minutes. The cross-examination by defense counsel was about 5 hours or more. The central point here is this. Both Mr. Libby and I agree that we talked in July. He called me to complain about some programming on MSNBC, which I had not seen. He then said that I talked to him about Valerie Plame Wilson, her working at the CIA, and that other reporters knew that. I said that is absolutely untrue. I did not know anything about her until I read it in the Robert Novak column several days later.
This is not a role you were asking for, we should probably point out, but you ended up, your version of events, as the crux of this case, really.
Yeah, it's a difficult position being in the news rather than just covering the news. And also, as someone who makes his living by asking questions on Meet the Press, being on the receiving end in a box in a courtroom, a witness box in a courtroom, is a much different experience. Meet the Press, you talk and talk to a guest and try to draw them out, let them finish their thought, complete their sentence. When you are in the witness box, you are sometimes limited to yes and no answers. Lyndon Johnson once said that it's a heck of a lot easier to throw grenades than it is to catch them, and was he right? But what I used for my own benchmark in this particular situation was something I was taught in 7th grade by good old Sister Lucille, and that is, if you tell the truth, you only have to remember one story, and that's what I did.
And Tim, what was it like? This has become such a big ongoing story and an event in Washington. You were able to look out at that assemblage from the witness box.
It was, and it was an interesting cross-section of Washington, citizens who came by to see this in action, journalists, political figures, a real assemblage. The trial now will continue. It is something that I did not want to participate, I did not want to be part of, I did not want to testify. But the judge decided otherwise, and I was there.
Tim, we'll hopefully find a place and a time when it is all over to get it all out and on the record. Tim Russert, though, with restrictions, thank you for joining us from our Washington bureau tonight after 2 days on the witness stand in the Libby case.
We don't know what's going to happen in federal court today, so let's kind of move on from that. But let's do a little hypothetical questioning here. If Florida remains in the Bush column, where do we go from there?
Well, it's pretty hard to see how Al Gore can win. Even if New Mexico were to be allotted to Al Gore, it would still only give him 260 electoral votes. He already has the other close states, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon.
All right. Now, if if Florida moves to the Gore column, what does the Bush campaign do from here?
They have not ruled out asking for recounts in Iowa, in Wisconsin, in Oregon, and they have moved to secure the ballots in New Mexico. If they won all those states, reversed the outcome, if you will, in Oregon, in Iowa, in Wisconsin, and held on to New Mexico, they would have enough electoral votes to be elected president.
However, the Bush campaign has for the past couple of days said, okay, here, folks, wait a second. You know, these recounts are getting ridiculous. It's going to be very difficult for that campaign to then come out publicly and say, let's go to other states, let's have recounts.
Yeah, but people thought it would be ridiculous for them to then go into federal court and seek an injunction like they are today, Matt. What they did is they watched Democrats within the state of Florida, and frankly, the Gore campaign expressed support for some of those lawsuits, both Secretary Daley and Secretary Christopher, although the candidate's name were not formally on them. But then suddenly the Bush campaign reversed itself and said, look, we're going to go into court ourselves, and we'll hear that this morning.
Tactically, there is a huge battle going on behind the scenes now in Florida, Tim. How are both sides handling that, in your opinion?
Well, the battle is as follows. These 4 Democratic counties are critical to Al Gore. They voted disproportionately for him in the election on Tuesday, and he believes a hand count will give him a disproportionate amount of the votes. And any contested vote is decided at the local level, generally by a vote of 2-1. The 2 Democratic watchers saying count it, and the Republicans saying no. That's why the Secretary of State's decision to stop all counting at 5 o'clock tomorrow looms so critical. If in fact she says, that's it, either you give me your machine count or your hand count up to now and certify it as your official count, or your votes do not count from your county, that would seem to strongly favor Governor Bush. That's why some of the counties are going to go into court today asking for an extension from that 5 o'clock deadline.
And if they don't get that extension, clearly the Gore campaign is going to go to court to try and force an extension.
Absolutely. And Matt, if in fact they get an extension and those 4 Democratic counties are allowed to continue their hand count, will Governor Bush's campaign then say, wait a minute, what about the Republican counties? Let's go have a hand count from them.
But was it a tactical error, Tim? Was it a tactical error for the Bush campaign not to do that in advance? I mean, they've missed some deadlines already.
Well, that's open to question, because Friday was Veterans Day, and whether or not the 72 hours after the election actually expired on that day, or does expire today. And would the Gore campaign waive any objections to a statewide recount by hand, or would a judge order a statewide recount by hand, even if the deadline had expired, in order to guarantee a full and honest count? It is an extraordinary, delicate, sensitive, chaotic situation, and we simply don't know what's going to happen.
Was Senator Lieberman correct for Bush to go into some Republican counties and ask for a recount, hoping to get more of the vote in those counties? Does he have to prove that there are some irregularities in the voting there?
Well, it can be requested because of the closeness of the race or an anomaly. But practically every county I've looked at in Florida, someone can demonstrate some anomaly. In Duval County, for example, which Governor Bush carried, 22,000 votes were disqualified. That clearly would be enough on its face to seek a hand recount if the extension, if the date has not expired, or if it was waived.
I know you're not a betting man, but look at the finish line for me. A week at Election Day, we were saying probably by this Friday. You don't think that anymore, do you?
Matt, you know, 10 days ago I said something. It's not up to me.
Wait a second, Tim. Wait a second. Matt. You have tampered with that board. It was the words Florida were much weaker last week. You've rewritten those, haven't you?
It's not my call. These are the people who are going to decide whether this thing ends tomorrow, ends Friday, ends a month from now. It better end by December 18th. Otherwise, Florida's votes won't count in the Electoral College.